Sure.
It's just a wonderful paper.
Thank you.
I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on what strikes me as a kind of paradox here, and sort of pulling out back a little bit from the focus on the use and abuse of science.
Uh-huh.
I find your case utterly convincing, your demonstration of how the degree to which science, or a certain kind of science, can be put to a kind of racist work, I suppose, for lack of a better phrase. But this is happening at the same time, insofar as I understand, there's a kind of intensification of a incredulity about science.
Yeah.
And we certainly see it here in Canada.
Yes.
The Prime Minister can't resist the temptation to denounce what he calls sociology, which is a phrase that just basically stands for thinking.
Right, right.
That we don't need thinkers or thinking to accomplish what needs to be, needs to be accomplished.
Yes.
So I wonder if you have some thoughts about how it is that America, at least, is in this situation in which there are, insofar as I understand it, more and more people that are utterly dismissive. Empirical research, fact-based research. And on the other hand, apparently putting a renewed faith in science of a certain kind of science.
Yes. So I think that part of the reason for the popularity of this particular kind of science, a science that reinforces a biological concept of race, is that it reinforces a biological concept of race. So if you read the comments, for example, when the New York Times publishes some of the articles I put up there, read the comments if you could stomach it. There are all these comments saying, I knew that black people were stupid, you know, and I knew they were innately like that. I mean, just the most horrific blatantly racist comments. And you just see that some people latch on to that science because it supports their views. And there's research showing that people like science that supports their pre-existing assumptions. And I think that there's a powerful combination between racism and science. Now, I'm not saying that science, the scientific method is innately racist, but I am saying that there's a powerful way in which biological explanations for social realities are very compelling. They always have been. I think you look at the eugenics era in the United States, where eugenics was mainstream science, and it was popular. There were fairs that allowed you to test the hereditary strength of your family and things like that. It was throughout American culture, and I think part of that popularity was that it supported a way of thinking about human beings that I think we can trace to enslaving human beings. I don't think there's been enough written about how eugenics, I think, was popular in the US because of a history of making people property. And so that history, I think, has it lays a foundation for certain scientific theories to be popular, and others aren't popular. But talk about this paradox. I mean, it's such an interesting paradox. So you have in the United States now latching onto this view that evolution created separate human races at the same time that you have people who don't want to believe in evolution at all. But you know what? I might believe in it just for the purpose of the creation of separate human races. There's also a popularity of genetics in the United States too, that I think outweighs the popularity of most other forms of science. There's a mystique about the gene. You see it in popular TV shows, especially crime-solving TV shows. And we know that juries are very, juries favor DNA evidence. Almost expect it. Well, there's been writing that now juries expect DNA evidence because they've been trained to expect it by TV shows like CSI and Law and Order and all of that. So, but I think the key has to do with the underlying assumptions and ideas, especially racialized ideas, that find confirmation in the science. And that's what makes that particular science popular. Also, it's interesting, you said, you referred to sociology. And there is, in the US, quite a distinction between the hard life sciences and the social sciences. And the humanities are even further down the food chain, and almost a competition now. And that is accentuated by this development. In fact, you could see it in some of the quotes where, like the one Kevin Beaver's quote, where he says, "We used to think gang banging was sociology, but the genetic scientists have the real answer." And this Nicholas Wade did this over and over again in his articles, where he would say that now the geneticists and the genomic scientists have the real answers that sociologists can't provide. In fact, there's one I quoted in the book where he interviews some genomic scientists that did some research which was interpreted, even though they didn't mention race in the study, but interpreted to prove that there really are 5 principal human races. And Wade interviews the geneticist that did the study, and then he interviews Troy Duster, a renowned sociologist in the United States, who at the time was the president of the American Sociological Association. And he frames the interview as if these genomic scientists are outwitting Troy Duster, that they have the real evidence of what race is, and you can't expect the sociologists. There's a recent, I can't think of the journal now, but a recent symposium that came out just last week in a science journal of asking the question of whether or not genetics has something to teach sociology, because there are recently some sociologists who've argued that sociologists should accept this genetic view of race and incorporate it into their research. It's quite an intellectual controversy going on now in the US between the what we call the hard sciences. Just the terminology, it expresses this kind of hierarchy of science. So even when you said sociology, some Americans would say, well, that's not science. What are you talking about? Yes, of course. We shouldn't be paying attention to that. We should be paying attention to the genomic science. So it's just interesting, these various hierarchies within science, and when some are more popular than others, and how race plays into that popularity.
Stephen Jay Gould
yes.
Talked about how some of these arguments are retreads by Buffon, and the accuracies and so on.
Yes.
So Gould's dead, right?
Yes.
So you're writing. Who else is writing, trying to expose what seems to be the fact that these genetic arguments are merely retreads?
Yes.
Old creationist arguments.
Yes.
Scientific racist arguments.
Yeah. Well, there's quite, I think, a vibrant group. We communicate on a listserv, and we know each other, researchers, we're historians, sociologists, anthropologists, legal scholars, some genetic researchers as well, but science and technology scholars who are studying this question of why. Why are we seeing this resurgence of this concept now? And so I'll just mention Troy Duster is one. So Troy has been writing about this for decades. He has a book called Backdoor to Eugenics that was published, I think, in 1990, and is even more relevant today than ever. He recently retired. We just celebrated his career in Berkeley in this past August. There's also a an evolutionary biologist named Joseph Graves. He's in North Carolina, who has written a book called The Emperor's New Clothes, which is, has that theme that this is the same old myth. And he has a book called The Race Myth also. And he's one of, unfortunately, the relatively few life scientists, either genomic scientists or molecular biologists or evolutionary biologists, who have written books that come out and just say this is wrong. And so Graves is very consistently does that, and his books are very helpful. And again, it helps to come from a life scientist, because often when social scientists say this, oh, but you're just a social scientist, you don't understand, you don't, you're right, you don't have any authority over what we're doing. Let's see, some other, on Beidel, a law professor named Jonathan Kahn wrote a book called Race in a Bottle that emphasizes how the commercial aspects of race-specific medicine are what are propelling this, not any kind of scientific evidence. And there are others as well. There's a anthropologist named Dwayna Fulwiley. She's working on a book, but she's written some articles. For her PhD dissertation, she went into the labs and followed these scientists that are looking, especially a lab that's looking for the gene that causes severe asthma. They believe that the reason why Puerto Ricans in the United States have higher rates of asthma than Mexicans in the United States is because the Puerto Ricans have this African gene that predisposes them to asthma. And so her work is fascinating because you hear the words coming from these scientists' mouths about their views of race. So for example, calling black genes and white genes opposites. There's one scene, and I won't go on and on, but one scene, I call it a scene, one encounter with researchers where they keep running the comparisons between the white and black haplotypes over and over and over again. And she says, why do you keep doing it over again? She said, we haven't found enough difference. We have to find difference. And she says, why do you have to find difference? And their answer, though, see, these people do not see themselves as racist. I don't think they're racist. I think they have a wrong view of what race is. But they say, well, if we don't find enough difference, no one is going to study black people's health problems. If it's not seen to be a genetic problem, it's not going to get any funding, because it's genetic research that's getting all the funding. So if we can show a genetic distinction, we can get more funding for this research. Yeah, Henry.
I want to go back to a larger narrative.
Yes.
You had talked about, to help me situate what David thought was an obvious paradox.
Yes.
Which actually I don't think is a paradox.
Yes.
Narrative.
Yes.
And that is what you have going on now in many countries across the world, across the globe, but increasingly in the United States and increasingly in Canada, is an erasing of the social.
Yes.
The social is being eradicated.
Yes.
Whether we're talking about the welfare state, whether we're talking about child services, social provisions, all the institutions that go along with them are being around. That creates a kind of crisis of agency in which we now resort to explanations in which we don't have to look at the social and the conditions that emerge from it to produce particular kinds of problems.
Yes.
So hence, if you couple that with the rise of the punishing state, what appears to be a paradox isn't a paradox at all. Science is useful when it contributes to notions of determinism. In fact, say people are responsible for their own problems. The social now has just been eradicated. So if they're responsible for their own problems, as you said, and pointed out that wonderful image, we have really two solutions to this. They can become disposable, they can become disposable, or we contain them. But that doesn't make enough sense to me unless we realize that correlated with that destruction of the social state is the rise of the punishment.
Absolutely.
That ideology really is serving less and less a way of celebrating a certain kind of critical agency or critical literacy, and is succumbing to a kind of fundamentalism, a whole series of fundamentalism. That now is the larger narrative in which that argument you're making makes much more sense.
Yes, that is absolutely the larger narrative. There's so many things you said that I could riff off of. So the word fundamentalism, to me, it's a kind of fundamentalism. Both the faith in innate racial difference. To me, it's a religion. It's a religion that people latch onto, and the social reality in front of them is obscured because that faith takes over. Also, what you said about the crisis of agency is so true too. That's where biological citizenship comes in, because where's your agency now? Oh no, it's not joining with other people to protest. It's not joining with other people to engage in democratic deliberation. It's not joining with other people to engage in forms of social change. No. It's buying a gene test to see who you're genetically compatible with and engaging with them online because you've found that you're genetically related. Forget politics. Forget politics. It's the genes that count. And forget pushing the government to do anything. No, you don't need to do that. Just buy the product that's going to solve your problems. I mean, it's literally, you see that in so many ways. I talk about in the book, the new duty of civil engagement isn't to be involved in politics. It's to donate your DNA to an online company or researchers. Just pay attention to this. More and more you're going to see, if you haven't already been solicited to donate your DNA, as if it's your civic duty. And that's what you see about civic duty. Meanwhile, you've got the US Supreme Court upholding the Texas voter ID law on grounds that we don't need civil rights protections anymore in the United States.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you all.